up. Do you want to introduce our special guest?
Yes, certainly. So, Dr. Hassan is a mental health professional and expert in undue influence tactics used by authoritarian leaders and destructive cults. He holds a master's degree in counseling psychology from Cambridge College and a doctorate in organizational development and change from Fielding Graduate University School of Leadership Studies. He began helping people affected by undue influence after he was deprogrammed from the moon cult in 1976 at the tender age of 22. His 45 plus years of experience give him a unique perspective on the damaging effects of undue influence and exploitation by destructive cults. Dr. Hassan is the author of 4 books, some of which are available in 10 languages: Combating Cult Mind Control, Releasing the Bonds, Freedom of Mind, and The Cult of Trump. His general audience courses and mental health professional continuing education courses include Understanding Cults, a foundational course, and Understanding Cults, a foundational course for clinicians. He's the founding director of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center, which provides training, consulting, and support to individuals who are struggling to leave or recover from a cult, and to families and organizations that are concerned about cult behaviors. He also is the founder of Freedom from Undue Influence, a not-for-profit entity with the purpose of conducting and publishing the research on undue influence that is needed to update legal and social policies. Dr. Hassan developed the BITE model, which is, we talk about this all the time on the helpline. That's the model of authoritarian control to identify control tactics, and the influence continuum model to discern ethical from unethical influence. He also developed the Strategic Interactive Approach, that's SIA, as an effective and legal intervention alternative for families to help cult members. Dr. Hassan believes that access to the truth, freedom of thought, and freedom from undue influences are basic human rights. Welcome to our show.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And I know it's late in the day for you, so we really appreciate you taking the time to be here and meet with us on a topic that we talk about a lot, we hear about a lot, and now we're going to get it straight from the horse's mouth. So I'm very excited.
Great.
So,
Ask
yeah.
away.
Great. Okay, we have many questions. We probably won't get through all of them, but we'll get through as many as we can. In your book, Combating Cult Mind Control, you describe your experience of getting pulled into a cult in the 1970s, which is what ultimately led to your work helping others recover from cults. Do you want to describe what that was?
If I must,
I mean, we're not
little
going to
tired
force
of
you.
repeating the story for 48 years, but I will say it's in chapter 2 of Combating, and I think we put chapter 2 for free on my Freedom of Mind website. But I'm not gonna not answer your question, but just briefly. Um, So essentially, I was never a joiner. I was a bookworm. I was a creative writing major in college. And I wasn't looking to join a cult or change groups or anything, except my girlfriend dumped me and 3 women flirted with me and lied and said they were students at Queens College. And I even asked them if they're part of a religious group. They said no, absolutely not. And that then led to almost 2.5 years in the Moonies cult, one thing after the next.
Do you remember
Um,
what crossed your mind that you would ask them if they were members of a religious cult? Did it
no,
look like that?
no, I don't. I really have thought long and hard because the Moonies were not on anyone's radar. In February of 74, Patty Hearst was abducted by the Symbionese Liberation Army by force and put in the trunk of a car with a rifle in her face. But I didn't know anything about the Moonies. I'd heard about Manson.
Hmm.
Um,
That might have been it, because that was a big thing in the news at the point, how he got all
but
the
they were
funding.
dressed like students. They were cute women, and they were just, making basically love bombing. And that's a very common technique for cults to recruit. But it's a very interesting story, which has led to my career because um, for whatever reason, I said yes. And I was a banquet waiter on the weekends at a Holiday Inn in Hempstead, and they wanted me to come for a weekend together. And I just said, I can't, I work every weekend. And they kept pressuring me to come because it would be so great. And then my boss said they canceled the wedding this weekend. Take the weekend off. And I've many times wondered if that wedding happened, my
Your
life would have
life would
been
have been
different.
totally different, an alternate
Yeah.
reality.
But basically, within a period of a few weeks, I was persuaded that God was working on Earth, that World War III was going to happen, that the Messiah was coming, and that I had been selected by the divine to be a leader of the world and save everybody. I know it sounds absolutely delusional.
And your background was Judaism, correct?
Yes, I grew up in a conservative Jewish family. My mom's parents were Orthodox, so we kept kosher and lit the Shabbat candles and ate challah, and I went to temple and everything. But the Judaism I was taught was pretty much of a turnoff, to have a God that killed the firstborn, or just, like this anthropomorphized, um, you know, uh, very, very unevolved uh, entity. I was very turned off to that notion. So after my bar mitzvah, I played basketball for my temple team. That was what I was into at the time. I grew up in New York, so the Knicks, the period
Yeah.
of the Knicks, and I grew up across the street from St. John's University, so I used to go over and watch them play. I was a manager on my high school basketball team. I, I, I took stats for rebounds because I wasn't good enough to be on the team. We were citywide champions. Anyway, I digress. The Moonies are what I want to say about the Moonies is that the beliefs are that he's the Messiah, he's sinless, he made a sinless woman, they have sinless children. Needless to say, they were drug freaks, committed suicide, and all kinds of other deranged things.
So when you
That's
say Messiah, are you meaning he's an incarnation of Jesus? Is it a Christian thing?
Meaning Jesus, the members were told that Jesus came to Sun Myung Moon when he was 16 and said, I failed. I want you to finish my mission on earth. And so God worked for 2,000 years to purify the blood lineage, and he moved the blessing from Israel to
To
Korea.
Korea, right. You're
Yeah,
right.
because the Koreans are God's chosen people, and when they take over the world, only Korean will be spoken. And it's really what I want to say when people say, "How could you do this work?" It's like if it hadn't happened to me, I'd never believe it was possible. But in all the years, I've heard hundreds, if not thousands, of stories of even more incredible BS and all kinds of stuff that I learned about in psychology. And literally, what's happening in politics in 2024, I was hearing with Sun Myung Moon in the leadership room because I was promoted, not that I had any power, but I was being groomed to run the organization. He said, democracy is satanic. We need a theocracy. We have to infiltrate the Congress. We're going to amend the Constitution and make it a capital offense if people didn't follow. I mean, literally what we're hearing today, I heard 50 years ago. And what I wrote about in the cult of Trump is that this has been a long game strategy for decades with very bad actors. And
So is that
yeah,
cult involved in American politics today?
absolutely.
Now, you mentioned in your book something like they were involved in, purchasing organizations as well, but so they're still around, the Moonies?
So,
But Moon died in 2012 or
so
something?
Moon died. His wife took over the main entity that had billions of dollars, but he has two renegade sons in Pennsylvania. One has a gun cult called Rod of Iron Ministries.org. He misinterprets Revelation. The Rod of Iron is a AR-15 assault rifle.
Oh, of course
Of
it
He
course
is.
it
literally
is.
has a golden crown of AR-15 bullets. He calls himself the king. He's already talked about changing the Constitution. He was at January 6th saying it was Antifa. The Moonies newspaper, the Washington Times, said it was Antifa.
Wow,
Mrs.
so
Moon paid Donald Trump $2.5 million to endorse the Moonies a few weeks after January 6th, virtually.
And did Trump go through with that?
Yeah, no, he got $2.5 million to say what a fine
So
organization
he
this.
did say that. I don't remember seeing that.
Oh,
No.
absolutely.
Wow.
And
wow.
Pence only got 550,000, and Esper and Pompeo were there too, getting money from the Moonies. No, the Moonies are major players. They're very bad actors. And I did an interview, one of my more consequential ones. I don't know if you know, I have a podcast called The Influence Continue. I
Mhm.
interviewed a man named David Lipsky who wrote a book on climate science denial since the 1800s. And he had a chapter on the Moonies being the center for climate science denial for the past 50 years.
What is
Wow.
the ration? Why would they be interested in that?
You ever hear of fossil fuel corporations?
Ah, so they have money in the industry.
Coke Corporation, for
Hmm.
example. Ever hear of, Saudi Arabia or Russian oil?
Wow.
So the
So
backstory of the Moonies, and I was a whistleblower when I got out. I was deprogrammed after I fell asleep at the wheel of a fundraising van and drove into the back of a tractor trailer truck at 80 miles an hour. But that put me in the hospital away from the group. This was 76 when this happened. There was no such thing as smartphones. I had a few cassette tapes of Moon's speeches, but other than that, I slept and I ate and I just had pain. But the separation helped a lot because it
Mm.
opened up the door to me calling my sister, which led to a deprogramming that I started involuntarily. And then I agreed to it because I wanted to prove to my family I wasn't brainwashed and I wasn't in a cult. But learning about Chinese communist brainwashing and meeting former members, including a woman I had recruited into the Moonies and I cared for, and she had left. Um, my mind started opening up, and I was like, "Wait a minute, Moon's a liar. What means if he's a liar, that means he's not a man of God. If because the Moonies teach God is a God of truth, so that means he's not trustworthy. That means he's not the Messiah. That means what have I been doing? And then
And
I
the
just
dominoes
cried for
started to
three
fall.
years. I
Mm.
mean, for 3 hours straight.
now
It's interesting that story. It reminds me of leaving, having certain doubts around like fundamentalist Christianity and noting some of the apologists and then finding out that they lied about some of the primary documentation and so on. And you go, wait a minute, if the lies are happening, then why? If, this is the source of all truth, and what's the issue? It's do you find that a lot of the people that you've worked with in the past, including yourself, then um, often have some kind of relationship, personal, with somebody that typically opens that door for the questioning? It's like finding a safe way out or through in order to, having a different community.
I could answer you in 50 different ways.
Hey, Pick
You,
one.
you
All good.
you you packed in the questions, so there were like and then I
Uh,
forgot the first one that I was going to say. But well, what I want to say based on learning and just I just have one of those minds. I love to learn and I read books all the time and I listen to podcasts all the time. What we need to understand is human beings are biopsychosocial entities, and we like to think we're rational, but we're not. We rationalize, but we're not rational. We're very emotionally driven. And for the most part, depending on a person's developmental stages, for the most part, 2/3 of the public will conform, as in Solomon Ash's conformity study, will conform to say a 3-inch line is a 2-inch line if everyone else in the room says with certainty that it is. And some even convince themselves that it is the correct answer.
mhm.
But most just go along with it. Some go along with it confidently. But the 2/3 number is a very interesting thing because we know in science a bell-shaped curve and that mid slice. We know
Mhm.
that with the Milgram obedience study, that 2/3 would electrocute a fellow human being in an hour because a stranger in a white lab coat says they have no other choice.
There's a acquiescence to authority piece.
Yeah, so we're
Yeah.
hardwired to conform to who is in our
Mhm.
vicinity that we identify with. We conform to people that we think are legitimate leaders. And then Zimbardo prison study talked
Mhm.
about the power of BITE. If you can control an environment and information in the environment and give roles, you're the prisoners, you're the guards. Um, you can have people, go have psychotic breaks and people get power drunk and sadistic. So what I want to say is that everyone can be mind controlled by somebody else, by other forces, unless you've been understand what it is, what the techniques are, and take measures to protect yourself. Having said that, the internet is now the primary place where all cult recruitment is happening. And it's being done largely with hypnosis and guided meditations and algorithms. And there's an estimated 5,000 data points collected on each voting American,
Mhm.
where these profiles are, in the dark web, and bad actors can buy that information, target a geographical area like a swing state, and work on people, either make them confused, make them feel helpless, make them feel depressed, or make them more extreme on the left, or make them more extreme on the right, or have them vote for a third party person. So
Yeah.
there are formulas that are being used, high-tech AI formulas that are very disturbing.
Yeah. So,
So
that's
going back,
interesting that you mention, that we're all so exposed to opportunities to be influenced. And that reminded me of one of the things you mentioned in your book that you called thought stopping rituals that we might engage in to stop ourselves from maybe critically evaluating what's happening. Could you explain a little bit about what that is and how we might know if we're engaging in a thought-stopping ritual rather than a critical thought?
Well, so so thought stopping turns out on my influence continuum, and if you haven't seen this graphic, you can download it for free on Freedom of Mind, but it talks about influence from ethical to unethical, and this is where the bite model is. But I lost my train of thought. You were asking me about thought stopping. So thought stopping could be done ethically by a therapist who's working with a client who is having obsessive negative self-talk, and the therapist explains this is a technique for you to learn to control your own mind. Instead of saying the negative thing, let's write down what you would prefer to say. So instead of having the thought, I'm stupid, you write down, I'm learning and growing. And you help the person learn how to stop the negative thought that they were generating and have positive, say a positive thought. So that's an ethical use. In cults like the Moonies, we were so programmed that, and we were literally taken to see the Exorcist movie, hundreds of us, and then Moon gave a lecture that God made this movie, and this movie was a prophecy of what would happen if we left the church. It was that night that the phobia was installed in my head, where any negative thought was a demon now trying to invade me. So we were taught to chant true parents, because Moon and his wife were supposedly the sinless parents. Milton and Estelle, my actual parents, were my satanic parents. But to chant true parents or glory to heaven, peace on earth, glory to heaven, peace on earth, over and over and over to block any doubts. Or if somebody asked a question that attacked the cult at all. So, and this is done in the context of what I believe is the essence of a cult identity. It's a dissociative disorder, and that there was the real Steve and the Mooney Steve, and as a computer malware program can be unintentionally installed by being deceived and clicking a link, this and takes over your operating system, this cult identity got programmed that took over my real identity. So every time my real self had a thought that wanted to surface, he would do thought stopping, block it, or emotion blocking things.
Well, that's an interesting metaphor. It kind of reminds me of another one I've heard where religion has been compared to a virus.
Well, I talk about in the cult of Trump, I talk about it being a mind virus and that it's mutating. And people are
Interesting.
born into a cult, they leave it, they never get counseling, they start their own cult, or they go into another cult and then they tell the new cult what the old cult used to do, and they would copy those patterns. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's epidemic. And I've been talking for years about which we should be having a public health emergency declared, with inoculation programs developed for vaccination programs to orient people what to watch out for, and intervention programs to train therapists and others. That's my strategic interactive approach. And recovery programs for people when they're exiting, so they don't feel like, it's them that's the problem
I wanted to go
instead of.
back to what you said before about how you left because you happened to have the hospital stay where you were separated from them, and it was the age before there were not only smartphones but even cell phones. So now, of course, that's not true. Everyone's got one of those in their pocket, and they can never separate like that. So that must make it much much harder for people to leave under any circumstances.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So once the internet came about, and I think I had a website in 94 or 5, very early on, because I had a client whose uncle was a computer scientist. He's like, you need to be on the internet. What's that? I'll make a page for you. Anyway, um, once that happened, it was a game changer for everything, because I used to carry pounds of photocopied material and books when I would go to places, and nobody knew how to find ex-members. Like I started one of the first ex-member groups in 1980, ex-members against Moon, and then I shortened it to Ex-Moon Inc. But essentially, and then when my book first came out in 88, a lot of cult leaders read it, and then they told their followers, you can't go home unless you're accompanied, or you can only go home
Ooh.
for a day. You can't go for 2 or 3 days, because they read, because I told what I did in my interventions. So it forced a shift, and that shift basically evolved to what I do now, which is I teach family members, friends, and ex-members my methodology, and I coach them how to interact with the cult member. So it's not a deceive the person to Uncle Herman's house under the guise of an anniversary for your parents. It's small little interventions done sequentially, but in a coordinated fashion. But what's different than mind control in unethical, this is about empowering people to think for themselves. It's not about telling them what they should believe or what they should do. It's about helping bypass the cult identity and thought stopping by delivering information to the real self to empower it. and
Oh,
and
and
so it's a slower thing, but there isn't the trauma. There isn't, and I have a 3-step phobia intervention in chapter 10 of my book, Freedom of Mind, that I think needs to be done. That frees up somebody to exit.
will
And I'll
that
just
help me
take a
with
minute
my
if I may.
spider phobia?
Excuse me?
Oh, sorry, I was just asking if that'll help me with my phobia of spiders, or is it
Yes.
just particular cults?
Yes, no. So phobias many millions of people have phobias, and they're the fastest mental illness to cure, actually. But it involves teaching people to discern using their frontal cortex. Is there actual danger where you can be harmed, or is this an irrational fear where there's no danger? You just believe there's danger. And so there's a several step thing. And what I want to say to everybody is, in that chapter I talk about elevator phobias, how some people are afraid to get into an elevator. And what happens with them is they either have a movie that gets triggered that they're going to plummet to their death, or they're going to be trapped for eternity. Those are the two things that will happen if they go into an elevator. They can't imagine riding safely and comfortably. They can only, so it's a visual negative movie. It's a negative self-talk,
Hmm.
you know. Like that kind of and then the fast breathing, holding your breath that creates the panic attack, right?
Mhm.
So I teach people how to control your own mind and say, is it a old rusty elevator in a third world country? Then you may not want to go in it because it could be dangerous. If it's a new skyscraper, it has emergency brakes. The worst that will happen is you'll pee or shat on yourself. That you're gonna live, you'll take a shower and you'll clean your clothes. That's the worst that will happen. So, but the thing is teaching people how to visualize, change their self-talk, change their breathing, and then the rest is systematic desensitization. Just
Oh, and
practice over and over and over in small increments. And so I've helped
okay.
people with 30-year elevator phobias in an hour.
Hmm.
Oh, wow.
It's
Okay, yeah.
sounds a
It's a
little.
once you understand, but you have to use this. If you're only working off of your amygdala, you're going to be afraid and you avoid the stimulus. And
Mm.
you'll do anything to rationalize how it's healthy to walk up 40 flights of stairs every time you go to work and arrive sweaty. And it is good for you.
Mhm. Unless you have a heart condition.
Yeah.
Okay, can I go back to something you said before? Because you talked about the Reverend Moon and I guess his wife, but like, what was
Please don't call him Reverend.
um,
You know why?
Dr. Moon?
He never had any seminary. He went, I'm a reverend.
All right,
I
Son
was
Young.
a reverend too when I was a Moonie because he said so.
Okay, so Sun Young,
Interesting.
Just
and
call him Moon or Mr.
Moon
Moon,
and
please.
Mrs. Moon. Moon and Mrs. Moon were supposed to be your parents. So how did this affect your relationship with your actual parents and other people in your
Oh,
family?
my parents were, as soon as I got into the group, my world was altered. My worldview was altered. I was not who I was before.
Yeah.
So my parents were evil. I had nothing to do with them. I moved out into the Mooney Center. I dropped out of college. I quit my job. I donated my bank account.
Oh,
And my
And now,
parents didn't even know where I was for over a year.
wow.
you mentioned also that when you were in the hospital and you ended up getting in touch with your sister and your family came and convinced you to get out, that in addition to the information you learned that led you to realize that this person that's running this cult is not telling the truth about things, you mentioned it was also important that your father was there and you were able to connect with him emotionally and see his concern. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that might relate to people who are concerned about their own family members who may be in a cult?
So I described the dual identity. So the real Steve knew my father was a good guy who was brainwashed by the communist media against father. But it was when my father cried and he said, "How would you feel if it was your son who met a controversial group and disappeared? How would you feel?" And it was the tear, because my father was not a crier, that touched the real me. And I had a cast from my toes to my groin. I was on crutches. I couldn't run away. I couldn't fight. And I was a true believer. So I wanted to prove that I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed. So when he asked me that question, I thought from his perspective for the first time. Didn't think about his perspective until that moment. And I thought I would probably be doing what you're doing now, even though I thought it was wrong. And that's one of the techniques in my approach is switching perspectives, right? Because the cure to blind faith is perspective. And if you can step out of your shoes into someone else's shoes and look at reality from their point of view, it changes your perspective. And what I can say about the SIA is that the worst thing you can do, the least effective thing you can do, is attack the leader, the doctrine, or the policies head on and argue facts. Because all it does is it triggers the cult identity to react defensively and to feel persecuted. And it drives the person deeper into the group by not trusting you. But if you engage in a respectful, curious, hey, convert me. I really want to step into your shoes. I really want to understand how you came to understand what you did. And you are genuine with that. It's not just a technique, but you're genuine about it. You can get to a place where you talk about a different group than they're in. And with the Trump people, it's talking about Chinese communism and the brainwashing, or pimps and traffickers. Those are the two that I find most fertile because they think that they're bad and they think they brainwash. So they're not brainwashed, but these groups brainwash. Okay, let's talk about Robert Lifton's 8 criteria, which is what helped me get out. And my bite model evolved out of his model and Margaret Singer's model. But the point is to explain and demystify what it is, because it's not magical and it's not mystical. It's very understandable. And since the early 80s, people love the controlling behavior, controlling information, controlling thoughts, controlling emotions. You can literally go to my website. There's a laundry list under each thing. Deception. Like, no one has informed consent in a destructive cult. They either lie overtly, they withhold vital information, or they distort it. Or
And this is the
every
bite
cult
model.
wants to control your sleep and have you sleep minimally and wants to give you rigid rules. So you can go through these, and this is what I did my doctoral dissertation on. Literally every single one of these things where I put on a Likert scale of never to always.
Mm.
And we
And
were
so
able to get
some
a very high factor analysis for authoritarian control. And guess what? You don't need to do all of these to take over a mind. It turns out about 40 of them
oh,
is
Hmm.
the number. So we're working on an app actually that people can fill out 40 questions of never to always in terms of whatever they're involved with, and it will give them a score from 0 to 100 on the influence continuum. 100 is like terrorist groups that will murder you
so
if
people
you
can
leave.
actually people can go in and answer each of the questions for their organization and actually get an output that lets them know, hey, this is likely to be a cult or not.
Exactly. And the 40 will be anonymous, so no one will know, and I won't know who you are or whatever. But for those people who want to contribute to science and want to help create a database on particular
Oh,
organizations, this will provide an opportunity to collect thousands of people's, answers for Scientology, for example. And another
wow.
graphic that's important is this one, because when people think of cults, they think it's a single homogenous thing. But most people are fringe members and they don't even know what the upper level believers believe. Like in
Mm.
Scientology, the OT levels are you're supposed to get pneumonia and die if you find out about Xenu and the galactic dictatorship before you paid the money. But
How
the idea
convenient.
is, if you have this and you're a therapist, for example, you can track somebody's membership. They're promoted, they're demoted, they're kicked out, they're brought back in, and it's very important in terms of deconstructing the mind control experience and empowering people to take control of their own mind and be in their body. And that's the
Well,
thing about dissociative disorders. They don't want you to be in your body.
Mhm.
Mm.
So
that
in the
seemed the
pre-show,
fringe
you
piece.
said something about some people go from cult to cult. So that shocked me because I would
Hmm.
imagine that if you've learned enough to get out, that you would stay as far away from other ones as you can, but not true.
No, it's unfortunate. And what can I say? People leave the Mormons, which is a mind control cult, and they'll get into TM, which is another mind control group. And then they'll get into some channeler who claims to be from the continent of Atlantis. And it's, if you understand bite and the influence continuum and malignant narcissism of the leader, then you have some frameworks for learning how to ask direct questions, like, who is the leader? Where did they get this stuff from? you know was the leader arrested for anything? It's amazing how many cult leaders are criminal backgrounds.
Mm, that
Sometimes
It's
registers with
for
so
current politics too right now.
exactly. It's so what I want to say is we're in the middle of World War III. You may not realize it, but there is a psychological warfare going on, and half of the country of America have been co-opted and radicalized
so
by
what would
Christian nationalists, by Nazis, by extreme
Mhm.
libertarian Ayn Rand cult
Mm.
members, but Russia, China, Iran, Hamas, Uh, and unless you understand this stuff, you can't protect yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was wondering when you were showing us that bite model and the list of characteristics that people could identify, are there some that really stand out that are kind of the most obvious indicators or things that people should think immediately, okay, if the organization has this characteristic, I should be highly suspicious? Are there like some that are more predictive than
Well,
others?
under thought control, I say all mind control groups have a simplistic all or nothing, black versus white, good versus evil, us versus them ideology. They don't have nuance. There's no room to be in the middle or a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's this binary thinking is very low level developmentally, I might add, as well.
Mm,
That's a tip off when a cult says don't when a cult says fake news, don't believe
Mhm.
anything negative,
Mhm.
or a group says don't listen to
Right.
any ex-member,
Right.
mm.
they're deranged, and
Or
they're
or
evil.
or
Those
if
are
you don't
clues.
elect me, we quote unquote will not have a country anymore.
Yes. So fear, a lot of fear, a lot of guilt. If you look under emotional control, aside from making you feel special and chosen to be part of the group, what's different between an ethical cult and an unethical cult? In an ethical cult, you have informed consent, fully informed consent. You get to ask questions, you get to read whatever you want to read. You get to talk to whoever you want to talk to. And if you're not happy, you can leave without fear of harassment. But the unethical groups, they'll turn on you. You're a comrade, and the minute you question Trump, ravage.
Mm.
And that sends a message to everyone else. Don't say anything. If you're having doubts, they're gonna pounce on you. They're gonna threaten you. They're gonna dox you. They're gonna do this. They're gonna cancel you.
So ethical cult versus unethical, that's interesting. On the helpline, a lot of times people will say, am I in a cult? I'm Catholic. And I would tend to have said not. Now maybe I would say it's an ethical cult, as opposed to my other example is Scientology, where you have to pay. The more and more you pay, as you said, you go up the ladder, and then you learn more about it. You didn't even know about Xenu or
Right.
anything like that.
Well, Hubbard was a psychopath and a drug addict. No, when people say, what is a cult? I say cults exist along the continuum. I'm in a book called The Cult of Mac. This is not a joke. I got interviewed years ago, and I'm like, "Why are you interviewing me?" He said, "My editor said I had to." I said, Your book's on computers, though. Why would you want to talk to me?" I said, "What's the title?" The Cult of Mac. I said, I laughed. I said, "I'll do the interview, but I have to disclose I've only had Apple since 1982. I have 3 iPhones, 3 iPads, 2 iMacs right now, and 2 MacBook Pros. So I'm in the cult of
True
Mac. I'm
believer.
also an avid scuba diver, and I'm also really into TEDx. Like
Yeah.
I
Yes, I
even
saw
wrote a
your talk.
blog.
I saw your talk just yesterday. I looked it up.
Yeah, I was like, I joined the TEDx cult. It's like because I like to learn and I like to hear from interesting people who have something that valuable to share.
Interesting. Well, I know we're getting close to the amount of time that you have with us. We've had a couple of questions, but before we go to that, Rob or David, did you have anything else you wanted to discuss with Dr. Hassan before we do a couple of questions?
So many questions, but so little time. I feel bad if we don't ask some of the questions we collected.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
looked like there
fair
was
enough.
several that were already posted.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's go to those. Um, Let's see, we've got one here. Someone is wondering what has become of the so called deprogramming profession? Did the controversy and lawsuits kill it completely? Have you ever been targeted by litigious cults coming after you for getting people out?
That's a different question.
Yeah.
So, I was a second generation Ted Patrick deprogrammee, meaning someone Ted Patrick is the guy who coined the term deprogram, which I've always hated that term, but I use it now because everyone uses it. So I have to kind of use the language people use. But basically, Ted Patrick would basically grab people, keep them away from the group, and talk to them about the Bible, typically if it was a Bible cult. And he would bring in ex-members, but it was very much content driven. And it worked, I think, because the person was away from the group and sleeping and eating and not being physically abused, but also meeting former members. Um, it didn't work all the time, but it worked. And in my case, they took my crutches away day one, and then that made me angry, and that's when my father cried, and I agreed to it. But I had nothing to do it for the cult because I was incapacitated, literally. I was, bedridden. When I first got out of the Moonies, I started getting approached by all these families whose kids were in the Moonies, many of whom I knew. And I felt incredible guilt for all the people I had recruited into the Moonies. So the only thing that was available was deprogramming. I would say of the 12 cases or so I did, half were conservatorship cases,
Mhm.
which was a ex parte conservatorship. The family would go before a judge and say, my adult son or daughter was the victim of artful and designing people. We want custody for 1 week to expose our son to information about the group and about brainwashing. And the judge would say, okay, bring him back in a week. And then the police would go and we would, escort the person to a location. And there was never any beating or torturing. People did it because they loved their adult kids, truly. And I would never stand for anything violent at all. And of all my cases, a few were involuntary and two went back, that I went, and they were pressured to write things saying that I held them against their will and all that, but I didn't. I was never sued. I never had a criminal thing, but basically the cults lobbied the ACLU and said, this is bad. If you don't stop deprogramming, they're going to come after you next. And so judges stopped giving ex parte, and they started giving, putting deprogrammers on trial for false imprisonment. I retired from deprogramming, went back to college, but I still wanted to help people get out. And so and then I became a whistleblower for a congressional subcommittee investigation. Then Jonestown happened. And that's when I just felt like I had to do something on a much bigger scale. Um, and so I did voluntary intervention. So we would deceive the cult member to a location. The family, I wouldn't meet them. The family would beg them to give 3 days of their time to prove that they were not brainwashed, a version of my deprogramming. And when they were able to get the person to commit to that time, it was very successful. But like I said earlier, when my book came out, that model didn't really work, at least with the big cults anymore, because they were primed to what to expect. And then just over time, things evolved where I developed this coaching technique because people who are in the group who are true believers, they want to convince their family and friends to join. Really, if you understand the mindset, if you understand the loaded language, if you understand the principles of how their mind was hacked and how to get them questioning, then people exit. So that's what I've been devoting my time. If that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. And Looks like we've got a few more minutes.
I'm just going to say, I think it was David was talking about cult apologists. What I want to
Mhm.
say is, as the big tobacco hired experts to say that smoking didn't cause cancer, and the fossil fuel corporations hired experts to say it wasn't caused by fossil fuels, the cults hired these sociologists of religion to say there's no such thing as brainwashing. All religions were a cult once, so we have to wait and see if they become a religion. And they would only talk to people who are happy in the cult, handpicked by the cult, and they were told never to talk to ex-members or critics. So when I did my literature review for my doctorate, I was amazed at how much disinformation is in academia or on the topic of cults. Like, it's just an amazing amount of disinformation. And so I'm really encouraged by the fact that former members are becoming mental health professionals, they're becoming researchers, and they're starting to say, do real science to define this epidemic.
Hmm.
Well, Rob, do you have a question you want to follow
Well,
up with?
one from the chat, which I think is pertinent, is basically like, well, let me just ask how it was written. How do you feel about organized religion now after having been part of the cult in the Moonies? Do you feel organized religion is in a at least small way still a form of a cult?
Sure. Yeah, so I actually interviewed the man, the rabbi that I credit for bringing me back to Judaism. It's on my Substack today and my podcast. And he was a scholar and a comedian. And I've been part of a community for 26 years, and we're not affiliated. We're an independent shul, and we love to learn, and we like to practice ritual and pray and do the holidays, but nobody's guilt tripping, nobody's being forced to pay money, and no one's being isolated from family and friends. Nobody's saying you can't go or you can't go to a church or anything you want to do. And that's the kind of I like to be part of a community. When I got cancer, they drove me to the hospital. They brought me food. When I lost my parents, they helped grieve with me, and I like that. I think humans are communal on many levels.
Fair enough.
Percent.
Uh, well, David, did you want to ask a question too?
No, that last point was just
Yeah.
spot on. It's something I talk with clients all the time about, just the centrality of community for individual mental health and growth and the need for it. And it's just that's lovely to hear
Yeah,
about
and,
yours.
and Greg Epstein was the head chaplain at Harvard, a humanist, and he wrote a
Hmm.
book, Good Without God. He
Yep.
has a new one coming out soon, critical of the internet. And I love the humanists, and they ask me to
Yeah.
speak all the time, and the skeptics, and Michael Shermer had me speaking, and James Randi, and all of that. I kind of think if it works for you, great. If you're functional, if you're able to have good relations, go for it. And but don't impose your stuff on me, and don't deceive anybody and want me to give you tax benefits as a religion when you don't deserve it. And this sucker is a threat to every religious group on the planet. Because the JWs lie when they go Bible preaching. They don't reveal the New World Translation is bogus, that it wasn't done by scholars. Nobody thinks that it's legitimate in the real world in Christian or Jewish theology. This is, on a policy level, fraud. They should not be tax exempt. Scientology should not be tax exempt.
Oh man, I
But
saw the episode of Scientology, The Aftermath, about how they became tax exempt. It is a crime, literally.
it
Yeah.
is a crime.
Strong armed the U.S. government into doing it. It's amazing.
It's a group that I've been dealing with for 48 years. It was surreal when I was on with Michael Rinder in the first year of the Leah Remini show, and
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm sitting next to the man that I feared for so long, who made my friends' lives miserable, and we're dissing Scientology together. I
Oh yeah,
said,
he was the head of the OAL, right? I think that's the name of the
oh,
organization. And then they
yeah,
came after
OSA.
him. They came after him when he left.
Oh, and they still are coming after him.
Mhm.
But it's so interesting because when you're a top leader, you know what the patterns are, you know what the policies are. You can tell them what they're doing wrong or what they're doing right, and how they're harassing you. But it is surreal.
Wow.
Anyway, everybody, forgive me, but I go to sleep at 10 o'clock, and if I go later, I won't sleep tonight because I'll be thinking about this meeting. But I hope it was helpful, and I want
Thank
to
you so
invite you
much. Thank you so
invite
much
Thank
you
for
to
you.
giving us your
Freedom of
time.
Mind and come check us out. And I'm definitely wanting to teach more people how to interact ethically with people in authoritarian groups, empower them to think for themselves. And what's the best way to get in touch with Dr. Hassan? center@freedomofmind.com is the email. My assistant Jim screens my emails because I am overwhelmed, and I'm getting ready for the re-release of The Cult of Trump. And yeah, if you're into my stuff, read my books. I say Combating Freedom of Mind, Cult of Trump, if you really want to do a deeper dive. And then there's my course if you feel like it. And I have some good interviews in the can for my influence continuum. Next week is going to be Braver Angels. Ever hear of Braver Angels?
No.
They
No.
brought that it was started by a therapist. They brought people who were red and blue and put them in a room together to talk to each other and listen to each other. And they did a
Oh.
project on what would be a trustworthy and fair election. And they had people from around the country putting together a list. So I interviewed someone who is on the leadership team from the red and the blue. And so we do things like that to just try to not mainstream things, but we try to give
Cool.
perspectives that are going to be helpful.
All right. Thank you again. Have a great
Thank you
night.
for
Be well.
that.
Thank you,
Take care.
Dr.
Thank you.
Good
Hassan.
night.
Yep, you're
Thank you for
welcome. Bye
joining
bye.
us.
You're
Bye.
welcome. Bye.
And we'll go ahead and continue the conversation here. Even though Dr. Hassan did have to log off, we'll still do all of our normal stuff that we do. Dr. Ray is going to give us his thoughts on this, and we can continue to do a little more Q&A if we have some more questions after that, and then we'll go over some of the other services that we offer at RFR, and we will go into our Hangout. Oh, also, we're going to look at the poll results too. So let me turn it over to Dr. Ray. Do you want to share your thoughts with us on tonight's talk? And you'll have to unmute yourself in order to do that.
Thank you. I don't have I don't have a lot to add. I just I love the bite model. I think it's added a lot to a lot of people have benefited from it, and we recommend it constantly. I know for many of our helpline agents, and we have it in our resources as well. Anyway, I don't have a whole lot more to say. I'm happy to participate in the Q&A and lend whatever I've got there. But other than that, I'll just turn it back to you, Kara.
Okay. Well, let's take a second then to open the chat for any questions. I know we didn't get to everyone's questions for Dr. Hassan, but if anybody has a question about the topic that they would like Dr. Ray or one of us to try and field, we'd be glad to do that for a few minutes, and then we'll go into our reviewing the poll question and moving on to tell you what's up next in the future and go to the Hangout. but I will wait just a moment and continue rambling to see if anyone has a question that they would like to put in the chat. We now have full access to Dr. Ray's brain. Get it while you can.
You may regret that.
Never. I mean, you didn't bring a PowerPoint, did you?
No, somebody mentions here, Sven mentions Dr. Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. That's
Oh.
really, really interesting and related to what our subject matter was today. I will say that the book is like that thick. It took me like a month to read it, but it's mind-boggling. It's eye-opening. And he won a Nobel Prize for economic psychology for it as well.
Oh, excellent. That is on my reading list and I haven't gotten to it yet. So I need to get on that. That sounds excellent. Well, oh, okay, we do have a question that someone has asked. They are wondering, can we define the terms that we've been using, such as cult, hypnosis, mind control? And I imagine it may depend on who you ask, but I think that's a great question. Do you have any light to shed on that, Dr. Ray?
Well, I think we'll leave what he told us about cults. It's on a continuum, the spectrum. I think that's a good way to look at it. And there's ethical, there's non-ethical. So
I've heard the thing where a cult is what a big religion calls a little religion.
well, I've heard that too. But anyway, I think he's got a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
Most people just say, "Oh, it's either a cult or it's not," But no, I think he's got a good way to look at that. As far as hypnosis is concerned, there's a lot of people argue off and on about hypnosis, but mainly it's just helping somebody or putting somebody into an altered state of consciousness. And maybe within that altered state, they can then be manipulated or convinced of something. And that's why many cults, many religious, many political groups like to get you off socially isolated, maybe without food, maybe without sleep, because that puts you into other mental states where you're more receptive to information. And this goes back to the 1950s, following, actually comes out of Pavlov. If you've ever had Psych 101, Pavlov, the Russian psychologist, and his discovery of Pavlov's dogs and all. But what Pavlov also discovered was basically what we know of today as stress, putting people under really, really high stress. And under high stress, people can be subject to a lot of crazy stuff. And as Dr. Hassan mentioned, roughly 2/3 of the people on this planet could be easily manipulated. And he mentioned the Stanley Milgram experiments. There's Stanley Schachter experiments. There's a whole lot of experiments back in the 60s that illustrated how easy it is to get people to do unethical things, like electrocute somebody else. Yeah, it was really interesting stuff. Today, they would be unethical, the experiments that proved it, but they were done, and we've got a lot of evidence since then that people are very easily manipulated.
I guess, Dr. Ray, it's anecdotal, but if you watch any of the rallies where one of the political parties and the guy is preaching about doing all these horrible things to citizens, everyone's just cheering him.
Yeah, isn't that scary as hell?
Freaking scary as hell.
I think, Jason, did you have a question you wanted to pose?
No, against my better judgment, I lowered my hand.
Oh, fair enough.
I think this might be a good time to talk about some of the limitations of these models and relying on, once again, self-admitted, old, unethical scientific experiments to make what seems to me a pretty broad claim. We'll notice we used some labels like ethical cults and unethical cults, and this might sound oxymoronic to some people. And I think that speaks to, once again, a kind of limitation here. I wouldn't call every fandom or every organization or every association or every identity that comes with the community a cult. And yet there seems to be room on that influence continuum. So remember that, these ideas have limits, and use what is useful to you. The bite model is certainly strong and will help people identify those high control environments that they might be in. So just wanted to add a little bit of a counter.
Oh, sure.
Well,
Yeah.
it's an important
We
thing
Go
sorry.
ahead,
Yeah,
David.
I mean, it's an important piece, and it's what Hassan was talking about at the very end around the need for community. And the reality is, I mean, whether or not you call it a cult or not is often going to end up being whether or not it's personally and socially destructive. Many of the characteristics of it. I mean, shoot, RFR does. It will appreciates community, has rituals. We just may not refer to it. Has things. It's simply group dynamics at play,
It
and
might end up
then
causing more confusion, though, to say we're an ethical cult. Like it kind of defeats the purpose of using the language.
yeah,
So
yeah,
Yeah. So, what I love about having this program every week is we get to hear ideas and perspectives from people that some of which may resonate more with some people than others, but it's always it's an idea. It's not the way. We don't deal in absolute. This is the truth. Follow our text or else. So. If you hear something useful that helps you, please take it, and we're glad it helped. If it does not help you,
So there's a
that's
really
okay.
interesting question in the chat, which kind of reflects a lot of the calls I'll get on the helpline. You want to tackle that one? The last thing that's in the chat.
Yeah, so here, I'll
oh
read it
yes.
aloud. It says, "Do you believe you can suffer and need to recover from religious or mind control trauma for non-believer immediate family of the cult member?" So an example would be a non-believer daughter of a mind-controlled mother.
Well,
Yeah, yeah,
if
yeah.
you look at someone who was raised by, say, an alcoholic father or mother and was abused, then they probably have work they're going to end up needing to do to recover their humanity and their agency. And sometimes that may or may not be a parallel. I don't know. What do you think,
Yeah,
David?
Well, it's certainly. I mean, this goes into there are gradations of what the person's gone through. I mean, most likely, if you're a close family member of somebody who's been closely or intimately involved in a destructive cult situation, you've had experiences that were problematic, to put it lightly. So does it necessarily mean that you're inherently broken or anything? No, I don't use that language. Is it something that you might find helpful to talk with somebody about? Sure, absolutely. That's why we build community that is supported. So yeah, reach out.
So another question in the chat: why are humans so inclined to blindly follow authority leaders? I think that's just part of our biological evolution. Right. I mean, if you didn't follow the leader in your tribe who was telling you to stay in the cave because there's tigers outside, and there were tigers outside, you got eaten and you didn't have offspring. So you tended to follow the authority figures, your parents and the other elders as you're growing up, and it's kind of like in that sense, it was like it's the way that we survived as a species. And now it's dangerous to have that in a lot of senses, but it's still there, baked in, so to speak.
Well, you can't really get rid of it.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is, I mean, shoot, we drive our vehicles at excessive amounts of speed down, highways and, based on trust in people we've never met, never will meet, and based on technology that most of us couldn't explain any of it. And so, we blindly follow. It's just, of course, the difference being we can, in theory, find out that information. It's not being kept from us. It's just an issue of study, rather than it's some kind of secret revelation that needs to be, shared only after you've, signed on the dotted line and handed over your bank account. Although that could be said
also,
of college.
huh. Car accidents are a leading cause of death, though, as well. So, there's that. Apparently, they may be a leading cause of getting out of a cult, too, or at least in one case. So,
Yeah, interesting. That was really interesting.
yeah.
He hadn't had that accident, hadn't fallen asleep, whatever it was, or, it's like, wow, there would be no bite model. There would, just be
Right.
very interesting.
Well,
And
if
our
he hadn't
conclusion from
been,
that is not that it was preordained and it was a sign from God. And what was that, Daryl? You were going to say
well, I was
something.
gonna say if he had his girlfriend hadn't just dumped him and he was susceptible
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
wiles of the
Mhm.
3
Uh-huh.
love bombing girls, he would have changed his life too. I think it's always
That's
fun to
true.
look back on your life and say, well, what if this one thing had
Oh my
gone a
God.
different way? I
Everything.
can look, yeah, it's really crazy how crazy
I,
our lives
I
would have
looked one
changed.
way walking down the hall in high school at the help wanted sign. If I had not done that, it was gone the next day. I got my first like long-term job at a Baskin Robbins, and that's where I met my wife. We've been married for 40 years. I mean, we would
Oh,
have never, a totally different life.
I love that. All right. Well, let's
We
see.
have comedian Paul Firth as being our comedian tonight, I think.
Does the
Yes,
bimodal have teeth?
they're always our comedian. I love a good pun, so I appreciate this. Okay, well, seems like we may be winding down on the questions. What do y'all say we look at the poll results from this evening?
Yes, please.
All right. So I will go ahead and share those results with everybody. So our first question was, have you ever been involved in something you believe to be a religious cult? And 47% of the people here tonight said yes.
Wow.
42% said no, and 13% are not sure. Wow, that's higher than I had expected. I mean, it makes sense given the topic of the show, but man, that's a big number. And I would love to know if people feel comfortable sharing in the chat what that cult was that you were involved in. And then while people are typing that, the second question we asked was, has anyone in your family ever been involved in a religious cult? And fairly similar answers, a little bit less though. 44% of people said yes, 31% said no, and 24% are not sure. So a little bit less certainty on that one. And then I'm interested in this last question. We asked if you have ever been involved in a cult, how did you realize it was a cult? And not all of the answer choices got responses, just a few of them did actually. Tied at the top were I became disillusioned with the group or its leader. And I discovered critical information about the organization or saw a documentary or podcast. Slightly behind those at 13% was I was asked or forced to leave.
And just
And
under
actually,
half were something else. That's a
yeah,
large percent. I wonder what those things were.
wow, we really didn't do a great job capturing the
Hmm.
main reasons in these multiple choice options. Sorry about that. But yeah, I would love to hear as well. I know a couple of people did put a response to that earlier on in the chat about what the something else was. I'm gonna have to go back and review, but yeah, feel free to tell us in here and we can talk more about it during the hangout as well. But that's interesting. Okay, well, what do y'all say?
I
We
have,
go on. Oh, go ahead, Daryl. Yeah.
well, I had just a couple of things I should have said earlier and didn't forgot. Uh, I met a Mooney today. He's an academic now. I hadn't talked to Mooney in years, and now I have met one today. And we had Stephen, Dr. Hassan here today too. That's kind of funny. But I just wanted to say that he said something that I think is important for us to remember. We train our agents and our volunteers very carefully to do the very thing that he's mentioned today, not argue with people, not attack them, because we learned, many people, not just us, have learned that drives people back into their religion, or makes it harder for them to question and leave. So for those of you who are volunteers, you know darn good and well, we put a lot of time and effort into training people how to ask questions, use street epistemology, use Socratic questioning, and all the things that we teach. And if you're not a volunteer and you got here through an agent, you probably got here partly because our agents were helping you explore your world in a way that felt accepting and safe. And that I just want to reinforce that from what he told us tonight. That's all. Thanks, Kara.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ray, and thanks, Rob and David and Jason and Glenda and Gail and everyone else and Nikki for being here and making the show happen. And thanks everybody for participating. I think this is a good time for us to wrap up. And as promised, we'll again describe for y'all the other services that we have available here at RFR if you are in need of further support. And I'll let you know what's coming up next on RfRx, and then we'll go into our hangout. And if you've heard this spiel 100 times, this might be a good time to do a quick bio break or refresh your
10-minute
snack or
break.
drinks
10-minute
before
break.
the hangout. Yes. So let's see. Rob, do you want to kick us off, reminding people what it is that we do here?
What the hell were we doing here? Yeah, so this was one of our live weekly Monday live stream meetings where we host guests who discuss topics that we hope are relevant to the community, and I'm sure tonight certainly was. It's not a replacement for the online community or the support groups, which we'll talk about also here. These talks and presentations aim to provide good information, advice, and coping skills to the clients of RFR and the community. You can send any pertinent questions or comments, inquiries, suggestions for other speakers to rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And if you've missed any of our 202 episodes, or who hasn't missed at least one or two, you can find those all on our YouTube channel. You can go to the main page and hit the RfRx events, and on that page it says see our YouTube channel, and you'll find all 202 episodes. The last one was the Pride panel featuring Glenda Jordan, Dr. Ben, and Jason Friedman. And we have a fairly new series called RFR Stories Australia. The 4th episode went up last week. That is ex-Catholic Chrissy Foster. And the link is in the chat.
Yeah. And again, for anyone that missed it, this is probably obvious by now, but we normally say this at the beginning. RFR stands for Recovering from Religion, and our mission statement is to offer hope, healing, and support to those struggling with issues of
Can you
doubt
imagine
and
somebody just sitting
non-belief.
there through this whole thing every time we said RFR, and they're just, why don't they tell me what that is? And we never.
Like these people with their acronyms. Sorry about that if we got to you a little late on that one. Hopefully you figured it out. But that is what we're here for, Recovering from Religion, and we'll describe to y'all a couple of our other services that you can check out if you want to get further support. So first of all, healing is what we offer through our helpline. That is available 24/7 via online chat or phone calls from anywhere in the world, and you can even schedule a call or a chat at a convenient time. And what you'll get when you call or chat in is a volunteer like one of us. As Daryl mentioned, all of our helpline volunteers have been thoroughly trained to offer empathetic support without judgment or criticism. They're not going to be selling you anything. They're not going to be trying to convert you to anything or deconvert you or threaten you with eternal damnation or take your money or anything like that. They're just going to listen to what's going on with you and try and answer your questions. They might refer you to some resources if we have some that are relevant to what you're talking about. And we have a resources page that a pretty cool team of volunteers put together for us. I think we might have a contributor here with us this evening who put together our resources and make sure that we have things available to refer people to that pertain to the types of things that people tend to call or chat in about, like lingering fear of hell or wondering if I might be in a cult or hey, I'm having trouble with dealing with family members that don't have the same beliefs as me, stuff like that. If you're calling in about it, odds are you're not the first person, and there may be some resources available that'll help you out. Next is hope. That is what we do through sharing and listening to personal stories. The idea being we're all in this together. Everybody is on their own journey and has their own experiences and perspectives, but we think it can sometimes be really nice to hear from other people about what they've gone through and how they've come out the other side, or just to hear from other people who are talking about the same things and have had the same worries or concerns or experiences, and not feel like you're the only person in the world out here dealing with any of this. So that's what we're here for. And for that, we have things like this program, RfRx, where we're here every week hearing from another guest speaker. And also we have our blog and our podcast. And our blog is on medium.com/xcommunications, and you can find written articles there. And the podcast is audio. And those are recordings of previous RfRx episodes, as well as some other content. And that one's a little bit behind on the RfRx episodes right now. So for the latest RfRx content, go to our YouTube page that Rob mentioned. And after that, we have support. Rob, do you want to tell people about how they can get support?
I do, but I wanted to mention something about podcasts. Today I was watching a YouTube channel, and the host said, and by the way, for those old school people, you can listen to audio on the podcast. And now podcasts are old school. It's like, oh, I feel so old.
What?
Holy crap.
What?
All right,
Wow. Oh,
support.
that's mind-boggling. And now I have to
Oh,
go get content a different way in addition to buying crew socks. I found out that my ankle socks are not cool anymore.
so if
So
that's old school, what
got
does he think like cassettes are? Audio cassettes, which I used to listen to my books on in my car, on my cassette player. Oh my God. All right, so support. So yes, we have peer support groups, and these are in 6 countries around the world, and we're looking to add even more. Between them all, we have about 40 meetings a month. And initially in the pre-pandemic world, they were all in person. But we were all forced to learn how to use these virtual methods, and that's why we're here too, by the way. But so most of those are now held on Zoom. Some have returned to in person, but most are still virtual, which makes it easy for you to find one and or find one or more. You can go to our main website, recoveringfromreligion.org, and use the group meeting calendar button, and it'll pop up and show you all of them. I will read you this upcoming weeks. We have 6 this week. It's actually a light week. Last week there was 11. So 6 this week. Tuesday there are 2 virtual meetings and 1 in person in Mount Vernon, Ohio. Didn't know there was a Mount Vernon, Ohio. Wednesday there's 1 virtual. Thursday there's 1 virtual, and Sunday 2 virtual, and another in-person meeting in Mount Dora, Florida. Again, go to our main page, hit group meeting calendar, and it'll adjust it to your time zone and your actual time, and you can find out which of those would be convenient for you to go to.
Yeah. And also, we have our online community, which used to be kind of a secret online community, but not a cult. You could leave anytime you want, and you still can. But you do have to go through a checkpoint to get into it.
Was it like
And
Hotel
that's
California where you could check in, but you
no.
could never leave?
No, it's more like the opposite. It's harder to get in than it is to get out. So
Right.
you're probably safe. Uh, but it's just an online platform, kind of like Discord. Ours is in Slack, where you can come in and have discussions with people with similar backgrounds and concerns in a channel that's devoted to that topic. We have more than 30 channels, each devoted to a different topic of discussion, whether it's a particular religious background that people may have come out of, like Jehovah's Witness or Mormonism or Islam or whatever it is, or maybe it's about a topic of mutual interest. Like we have one for people who are non-believers in the military. We have topics about sex and relationships, parenting, whatever the case may be. So what happens is, if you are interested in joining the online community, you have to call or chat into one of our helpline agents that we mentioned earlier, and they'll ask you a few questions, see if it sounds like a good fit. And if it does, they'll send you an email with an invitation and a link and instructions for how to join. And so then you use that to get in. And once you're in there, it's a heavily moderated space. It's not just open to anyone on the internet, it's only open to other people that are in the community. And there are moderators and RFR volunteers in there who you will also interact with while you're there. And in addition to that, they also have weekly hangouts. Those are currently being held on Fridays and Sundays at noon Central Time, kind of like what we do after RfRx, but there's not a speaker or anything at the beginning. It's just a hangout to sit and chat. Okay, so that's it for that. But Rob, what if people are looking for professional support?
Yes, professional support is very important, as we talked about with Dr. Hassan a bit. So we have the Secular Therapy Project. This allows our clients to connect with licensed secular mental health care providers. We have 910 therapists. They've served collectively over 35,300 clients in 9 countries and all but 3 U.S. states. So we vet these people who apply to the program to make sure that they are licensed in their state or country, that they maintain a secular practice, no proselytizing. They're not going to tell you to open to, one of the gospels to save your marriage. And they exclusively use evidence-based treatments, no pendulums and Ouija boards to help you, improve your life. So you can find that at seculartherapy.org or go to our homepage and there's a button there for the Secular Therapy Project.
All right. And one final shout out to our friends at the atheist community of Discord. Thanks to our wonderful volunteer, Nikki. All of our shows are live streamed over into the atheist community of Discord, which is a fan run Discord server of the atheist community of Austin. And in addition to RfRx, you can listen to a whole bunch of other shows on there, as well as join in the conversation in dozens of other channels that are devoted to secular topics of discussion, as well as just conversation around whatever the folks in there are talking about that day. So if you're looking for more community with secular folks, that's another good place to start. It's also moderated, and you can see other shows besides ours. So I dropped the link to that in the chat. And to let y'all know what's going on next, once again, thank you everybody for being here. And thank you to all of our volunteers for making this happen every single week. A ton of work goes on behind the scenes, not only to get these organized and then make them happen, but then also to get them put up online and advertised and everything like that. So thank you to everyone, and thank you to all of y'all for being here. And be sure and join us next week. Hey, we're going to have a familiar face next week. I believe it's David Teachout and T. Rogers. David, did you recall that? And would you like to
When
tell
you're like,
us
wait,
what you'll be
it
speaking
is
on?
that time.
It is
Next week
that
is the
time.
second. Yes,
Yes.
we're gonna have
Do
a
you
well,
remember what you'll be speaking on?
vaguely has something to do with the latest Deadpool Wolverine movie, I'm sure.
Certainly.
No. Well, I mean, there was a lot of death in that movie. No, we'll be looking at his workbook on, secular care with death and dying, questions concerning, end of life care, and looking at things from a secular model. It'll be a little different. So it's going to be more of like me interviewing her and kind of going through that rather than a presentation type thing. So actually a little bit closer to what we had here tonight with Dr. Zahn. So she's really excited to share what she's got, and one of the most delightful, lovely people I've ever met. So
David, I
it's gonna be
think
great.
our audience is going to be very interested in what she's got to say. I have been blown away
100%.
by her work.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got me asking and thinking about stuff I never dreamed about. So come
You
here.
and me both.
Yeah, come here next week if you want to really understand some interesting stuff. I want to
Yep.
put another plug in for Rob mentioned the RFR Stories podcast. This week, the Christy Foster, I listened to the whole thing. This is an amazing human being that challenged the entire Catholic Church and also Jehovah's Witnesses all in one fell swoop and got laws passed and got legal ramifications. What she accomplished in her life is hard to believe that one person could do this. And she's written 2 books about it. Her children were abused by Catholic priests, which is a big reason why she was motivated. But I just want to encourage everybody to go listen to it. It's long, but you will come away with a new appreciation for how insidious the Catholic Church is, and by extension, Jehovah's Witnesses. She mainly talks about the Catholic Church, which was hers, but one of our board members, Sherry D'Souza, was heavily impacted by that report that came out against the Catholic Church, because it also included Jehovah's Witnesses. And we wouldn't have Sherry here if it hadn't been for that report.
Wow.
Anyway.